Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon and welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Molly Cook with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I'll be helping out with technology today. Today's topic is how are my local WIOA performance outcomes determined and what are the impacts of success or failure? As a reminder, all participants on this call are in listen-only mode and cannot unmute themselves. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post those in the Q&A or chat box, and we will address them at the end of this webinar. If time permits, we will address questions as the webinar progresses. A reminder that this webinar will be recorded. The presentation recording and any materials presented during today's meeting will be available on the icsps.illinoisstate.edu website and on Illinois WorkNet within 48 hours. And I'm going to put a link to that right now in the chat box. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this presentation is offering closed captioning and the recording will also offer closed captioning. A reminder that if you have a faulty internet connection that you can go ahead and call in via phone with the link that was provided in your original registration email. With that, I'd love to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters today to get us started. Oops, sorry, I forgot to do what we always do. I forgot to do our polls, so we'll do that right now. So our first polling question is, what is your local area? And I'm going to launch that right now. Go ahead and take about 20 seconds to answer that. Okay, I put the results up there. It looks like we have partners and representatives from all throughout the state and with a large central and southern Illinois presence, as well as northern. So awesome, it looks pretty even. That's great. Okay, then the next poll question we have is, which partner do you best represent? And we'll do another 20 seconds on this one. Okay, so it looks like we have all the partners here as well. Excellent. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to our presenters today.
Great, thanks, Molly. Appreciate the welcome and thank you all for joining us today. Today you'll be hearing from Brian Richard and Andy Blank from the Northern Illinois University's Center for Governmental Studies. They'll be speaking on the Statistical Adjustment Model, and I'll be presenting on other areas of this. I'm Mark Burgess, the Performance Measures Manager here at the Office of Employment and Training. Been working in this role now for over a year and a half, but as most of you are familiar with me, I've been around the workforce program for over 16 years now. So looking forward to sharing more information. Hope you were able to join us last week. We did a WIOA Performance 101 session, and that recording, as Molly said, is up on the ICSPS website, along with all future ones, including this one, within the next 2 to 3 days, I think is generally the timeline. Today, we want to make sure you have a better understanding at the end of the day of how performance outcomes are determined. We want you to get some insight on the statistical adjustment model, what factors go into that statistical adjustment model. Brian and Andy will provide you a nice overview of that. They provided a session quite a while back in the virtual summit back in April, but want to kind of revisit that subject as they've had a lot more development in their assisting the state to get this kind of ironed out and all the information into it. As I mentioned, they'll include individual and economic characteristics in that discussion that might affect your performance goals. We'll also talk about a timeline for determining performance, such as success or failure. If you are on our email list from the policy unit, Laura Don's unit, you would have received an email, I think, this morning indicating the issuance of a new WIOA notice. So we'll talk about that. And that's the pilot project there on the last bullet point that we're implementing to try and kind of phase in implications of performance outcomes. So we'll discuss all of that today. Obviously, we have some obligations to federal statutes, whether they be the WIOA Act, specifically Section 116, or the final regulations, both the DOL version and the joint version. I do want to say that I noticed a few of you are from other than Title I programs today. I'd love to have all of you joining us today. And in the future, we're going to be doing a little bit more concerted effort to coordinate webinars and professional development so that we can all speak the same language to all of you at one time. At this time, we're just focusing on the Title I program as we are preparing to issue additional new and revised policies around performance that will support the WIOA notice that went out today. So look forward to that in the next several weeks to start getting some of those. We'll probably have them go out in 2 or 3 bundles of policies, but we'll continue to work on issuing those. And then other WIOA notices pertaining to some of the topics that we'll discuss today that we have to have an obligation again to comply with and pass that on to all of you at the local area level. As a reminder, the performance implications of WIOA apply to 4 partners with 6 programs. We at Title I-B, or more commonly known as just Title I, with our workforce development programs here at Department of Commerce, oversee 3 of those 6 programs. Sometimes people get confused. They hear 6 programs or 4 programs, and to clarify, it's 4 partners, 6 programs. So we're going to talk from a Title I perspective today, but a lot of this is consistent with what you might hear if you're from one of those other partners. So I think you'll still benefit a lot from the information you're going to receive today. 6 measures we talked about in brief last week in the Performance 101 are those here in front of you: the employment rate second and fourth quarters, median earnings second quarter, credential attainment, measurable skill gains, and then the final one that's still in a pilot project phase is effectiveness in serving employers. We're all obligated to these for the most part, except for a couple instances. You'll note on this table here the Title III employment services at the Department of Employment Security. They don't have to respond to or be held to the credential attainment or measurable skill gains just based on their program implementation. But all the other ones, especially the 3 highlighted here in orange with Title I, do apply. So we have to continue to push all the data and information that is submitted and then submit that to Department of Labor at the end of each quarter and at the end of each program year. So we'll be talking not so much about these actual measures, but what are the implications of failure or success, hopefully in most instances, in meeting set goals. And we'll talk about how those get set. We need to understand some of these basic terms of the levels of performance before we move on. Many of you were part of negotiations back in October of last year when the state met with each of the local board representative teams. We set proposed levels of performance prior to those negotiations, or I should say your board set proposed goals. You submitted what you thought would be acceptable levels of performance, considering all the variables and indicators that you know exist in your particular local area. We came together in October to negotiate levels of performance, and that's what you've been kind of gauging your outcomes on throughout the program year of 2020. And now that we're into program year 2021, you're continuing to gauge your performance on those negotiated levels. But we're preparing to, through the use of the statistical adjustment model, introduce the actual levels of performance and adjusted levels of performance. So we'll talk about those a little bit more in depth, but the actual levels don't change. Those are what you produce, that using the methodology and formulas that are provided for each of those 5 measures. The adjusted levels, as it says here, are the negotiated levels with an application of the statistical adjustment model that could either go up or down based on the factors that are incorporated into that statistical adjustment model. And that's what each local board and local area are held accountable to, the adjusted levels of performance, not negotiated levels. Again, those are just a guide throughout the year. We've had a lot of questions come in indicating they feel like they may be failing a measure, and our response always is, while it doesn't look good today, we don't really know what your outcome is until we do these adjustments and see if you truly are having a negative outcome. So hopefully we'll have that out to everyone in the next couple of weeks. We're still working with Northern Illinois University to populate the statistical adjustment model, review it to make sure it's accurate and all that, and they'll speak to more of that, the details of that here in a moment. A little bit more about that negotiation process. We met with the Department of Labor's Region 5 back in May to set our negotiated levels. We're still awaiting adjusted levels from them to see how we've done as a state. Preliminary outcomes based on those negotiated rates are very favorable. So we hope that the model doesn't adjust us down any, or if it does, not in a significant way. We have to wait for those negotiations and determination of negotiated goals before we can meet with all of you at the local level. We did that back in October, as I mentioned already, negotiated for program years 2021 and 2020 and 2021 through negotiation teams that your local boards identified to act on their behalf. We'll be doing another round of these negotiations sometime in mid to late 2022 to identify the negotiated rates for the next two program years through 2023. How do you know how your performance looks? There's several ways you can look at this. This screen in front of you, if you're have access to the Illinois Workforce Development System and have the rights to see performance outcomes, you can go to the staff menu, identify one of the three outcomes under performance management that is related to local goals and outcomes, and something like what's on the right hand side of this slide will pop up. This is our state goals for last year's program 2020, and like I said, if you look over here at the right hand side, it looks very favorable that we've exceeded or met every single one of our goals with no failures. But until we get those adjusted levels of performance and compare our actual outcome there in that middle column to the adjustments, not these negotiated goals and the thresholds, will be the only time we'll know what we did as a state. But we appreciate all of your successes to help us as a state succeed, and just hope that the outcomes upon adjustment look just as favorable as they do today. Another way you might see some performance outcomes, if you have access to the Illinois Performance Accountability and Transparency System, or what we call IPATS. That's a page on Illinois WorkNet where we have performance there. We have kind of career planning as well, a dashboard where career planners can see how their participant files are progressing. But there is a dashboard or a performance section that you can go to and see performance. You'll see down further that I've got this selected for statewide, but if you drop that down, you can look at your own local area and see how your performance is, and it creates these bar graphs for all the measures, and it tells you right there on the right everything that you would have seen on our IWDS screen. A lot more user friendly, we think. So we hope all of you will be using the IPAT system in the future to determine and view your outcomes. But it tells you the same information. You can also drill down further through the bottom right hand corner depiction of the table view, where it gives you all of the information, additional information, including registrants and completers and exiters. But it tells you what the two data elements that went into the calculation for your actual outcomes are, the numerator and denominator. So if you've got access, again, as an administrator, you'll be able to click on those blue highlighted kind of numbers and see who's in that pool to ensure that you're getting appropriate calculations, and it's gathering the appropriate participant pool in each of those factors. And this is available for all 5 of the measures. I've only pulled up one of those. Depending on what your drop-down selections are, you can either see one of those at a time, or you can look at them all at the same time. And that kind of is what we see here on this next slide, is the radial graphs, where you can see all 5 of your measures in the adult program. Again, this is the state depiction, not any one LWIA, to show what we did for program year 2019 is the example here. So through these, you can see what your percentages are. The higher the percentage or the higher dollar value, the more full the radial graph is. And if you were to kind of hover over each of these, and I should have put that on here as one of the depictions, the same information you saw on the last page over here on the right-hand side of the bar graph will pop up into an info bubble or a text box and tell you what all of that information is. You can again further drill down into the table view in the top left-hand corner here and further into that participant pool, so you can see who was being calculated within the numerator and denominator. So there's many ways for you to look at this. We think the iPad system again will be your new friend as far as looking at performance, but you do have to have the appropriate rights. You have to have access to that. So if you're someone that feels like you need that access and don't already have it, reach out to myself or Paula Berry, and we'll connect you with the right people to get you that access at Illinois WorkNet. I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Andy now to go into some of the discussion on the statistical adjustment model. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark mentioned, Andy and I are doing the number crunching behind the statistical adjustment model, and I just wanted to kind of explain at a high level how it works and what the purpose of the statistical adjustment process is. And so it is really intended to level the playing field by accounting for changes in your customer mixes or in your local economy, and adjusting your goals based on those changes. When each local area negotiated their performance targets, they obviously didn't know what their mix of customers were going to look like, or what changes in the economy might occur over the year or two that they negotiated for. And this model is a way of trying to adjust for unforeseen changes. Go to the next slide. The U.S. Department of Labor does this on a national basis for the states, and they've published a methodology that we've replicated for our state level local area model, using what's called a multiple linear regression model with fixed effects. I'll give you a textbook if you want to learn what that means, but we won't go into the gory details. But what it does is it adjusts performance outcomes based on the changes in your customer mix for each measure, or for each performance indicator, such as employment rates or median earnings. Next slide. So like I said, when the local areas negotiated, they didn't know what conditions were going to look like when they were actually operating during the year. So the thinking behind this is that you're negotiating up front, and then the model will adjust your performance targets to make sure that states and local areas are not held accountable for things you can't control. You can't control what's going to happen in your economy. You can't control who's going to walk through the door. And so this adjusts your performance targets for the actual case mix and economic conditions that you experienced during each program year. Go to the next slide. So the model adjusts based on all of the participant characteristics that you collect during the intake process, the the demographics, the barriers to employment. One important point that I think we need to make here is that this statistical adjustment process makes it even more important that you capture all of this information from your customers, especially the barriers to employment. If you're not if you're just capturing one barrier that makes them eligible and not capturing all of their potential barriers, that we can't analyze your customer mix if we don't know what the barriers of your customers are. So it makes it really important that local areas are collecting accurate and complete data on their customers. And also there are variables in the model relative to employment in various industry sectors and the overall unemployment rate. So again, we're trying to account for these factors and separate them from factors that you are actually able to control. Whether you're choosing the appropriate training for customers, for example, or whether you're getting them the appropriate supportive services. So it makes you accountable for the components that you're able to control, and then adjust your targets based on factors that you're not able to control. And so let's look at an example here. So this is the actual state level model results for Illinois from PY 19. So I think this was the initial pilot at the national level where they created this statistical adjustment model. So nationally, there's these results for each state. And so this is how the model works for the employment rate 2 quarters after exit. And so you can see for each of the demographic factors here on this screen, there's a coefficient in the first column. And it can be, I guess what's important here is whether it's positive or negative. And then it looks at the PY prior is the data from the program year that the model was created from. So in this case, it's PY 18. And then for the current year that's being adjusted, we also have the data for. So for example, there were 58% female customers in PY 18 and about 55.5% in PY 19. So that change was about 4.4%. And then, so they multiply that change in those variables by the coefficient to get the actual adjustment. So you can see the coefficient was positive, but according to the case mix, the percentage of females went down, so the change was negative. So the adjustment is actually negative by 0.19%. So this factor alone lowers the target by about 0.2%. And then you can see how this works. Some variables increase the target, those positive in green, and some decrease the target. And then overall, the model, they just add up all of those adjustments to come up with that adjustment factor. You see it up there in the top right, where the target was actually raised by about 3.6% for the employment rate in second quarter after exit at the state level for this program year. Again, this is previous year. We can continue the example and look at the next slide. This is just how some of the barriers impact that same measure. You can see, some caused it to increase, some caused it to decrease. And so all of these variables are included in the model that's generated. And then the next slide, I think, is our last kind of detailed, where we look at some of the, so this is an example of median earnings. Same concept, we're just using dollar values instead of percent employed for this one. So you can see how each either increases the target or decreases the target. And so those are that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how the model comes up with its adjustment factor. Again, all of these individual variables create a change in your target, your performance targets. And when they're added all up, it comes up to that overall adjustment factor. So you can see here, the state was, the target was increased by $874 based on the customer and customer mix and economic conditions. And then so just kind of the overview, the last slide we'll talk about for the SAM is, kind of how this works. So you start with your negotiated level. Again, all of you have this negotiated level for the local area already. The adjustment factor is applied to that negotiated level to change it. It may go up or it may go down. And that adjusted level performance is now your actual target for the current program year. And then your actual performance is compared to that adjusted level of performance to determine whether you meet, exceed, or don't meet your target for that particular performance metric. I know that there's a lot of technical detail in that, and you may have questions later when you're reviewing this, or especially when the results come out. So we will be available to kind of walk through this when the results come out.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, it's a lot of technical information, as you mentioned, a lot of formulas and factors that are difficult for me to even understand. Maybe others, once they see this, will have a better understanding once they see the final statistical adjustment model and how it applies to them locally. As Brian said, we'll be issuing that. We're developing a WIOA notice that will provide you all of your adjusted levels of performance once we have the SAM finalized and applied to the negotiated goals. So the next couple slides are just our sample, kind of what it might look like. We're using that radial graph to depict this. This isn't an actual LWIA, aren't the state goals and adjustments by any means. It's just something we created to help you visualize a little bit better. So here on these this first slide, you see the 5 measures I mentioned. Here's the pop-up kind of bubble if you hover over each of the radial graphs on your local area, if you're looking at that, and the information that'll pop up. So in the far left, upper left, you see the employment rate second quarter, and we had a negotiated rate of 72% with the 90%, just reminding everyone, in order to meet a goal, you only need to reach 90% of that negotiated goal. So that's what that threshold is you have to at least reach that in order to get a meet. If you exceed the actual goal, then you get just that, and exceeds in your status. So here in the top left, the outcome was 69.5%. That doesn't change. The SAM doesn't change the actual outcome. Just want to make that clear. It's going to change the goal. It's not going to change your outcome. And Brian mentioned that you'll be then basing the outcome on that new adjusted level of performance and the threshold that results from it. So here in these 5 measures, a couple of them meets the negotiated goals. A couple of them unfortunately fail. One by a fairly small margin, one by a considerable margin, and then we did have one that actually exceeded the measure. So that's how you would view it if you're on the iPad system. Much again, better visualization by using iPads versus going to the IWDS screen. And we'll probably be using iPads because it's a lot more programming in the IWDS system than it is to update the iPad system. So we'll probably have iPads up and running with these adjusted goals and outcomes much sooner than we'll have it available in the IWDS system. So again, be familiar with the iPad system. If you feel like you're someone in the performance or administrative area that should have access to this and don't think you do, reach out to us and we'll verify that and ensure you get the access you need. So in the next slide, we look at the same exact 5 measures post SAM, and you'll note, if I can get it to change here, you'll note the figures underneath the graph, the radial graph didn't change because the outcomes never change. But the colors and the information within the text box did change. And that's because we, kind of pseudo use the SAM to create this, even though it's a sample, it's not an actual. So in the first example, the goal went from 72% to 69.4%. So when Brian was going over those examples, the one he had initially had a positive 3-point-something% increase. So actually that was indicating your goal would go up, which is kind of indication that you probably didn't serve the people that were predicted at the beginning of the year that you probably should have done. And so as a reminder, to help you out the best possible way, you should be capturing every bit of characteristic that you can from every single participant. Even though there might be only one barrier that gets somebody eligible for one of the programs, if they have additional barriers, you need to make sure your career planners are documenting those in the systems of record that you're using, whether that be the Illinois Workforce Development System, IWDS, Career Connect, if you're up in the Chicago area or something else. You should be capturing everything you possibly can, not only for your performance outcomes, but really it helps you develop the appropriate individual employment plan, individual strategies for your youth to ensure that they're getting the services that they need to succeed. That ultimately comes back to your performance, but it's all about really initially understanding your participant to the fullest level possible, capturing every barrier you can so that you can develop and work with them on identifying all of those services they need. And not every barrier, not every characteristic can you pinpoint. I think Brian and Andy would agree that if you capture this, it's automatically going to reduce your goal or it's automatically going to increase your goal. It's really about what was expected versus also what actually happened when you look back and use the SAM at the end of the program year. So we really want to capture those for the services, benefits of the services plans, and let the performance speak for itself. So again, in this situation, I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth. The top left employment rate, because the goal went down, meaning the adjusted level went down, the actual measure went from a meet, because it was only meeting the threshold of 64, not exceeding the goal, to the adjusted level dropped to 69.4 based on those factors. And now our 69.5 is actually an exceed, not a meet, because it's above the actual level of adjustment, which obviously it was above the threshold as well. The second scenario there you can see was a failure prior to utilizing and applying the SAM because it was below the threshold even, but with some factors calculated in and the SAM applied, the adjusted level went down and the threshold went down enough that 63.95%. And I'm sorry that in doing this manual, I typed in something wrong in the current. So I apologize for the error on that slide. That should be 63.95. Those two should be consistent and will be consistent once they're in the actual iPad system because they'll be connected. So you can see that your goals can go from a meet to an exceed, could go from a failure to a meet. Some of them are going to stay the same, such as this failure and the exceeds at the bottom too. This failure at the bottom, it was so low, so far below the threshold that even though there was an adjustment down of more than 2 percentage points, the threshold didn't reduce enough to get that into a meets category. And then when we were exceeding, we exceeded in the measurable skill gain so much that the adjustment down was only going to keep it in an exceeds. Now, the one thing that's overlooked in this set of examples is what happens if something goes the other way. So yes, there could be instances where an exceed because of the characteristics identified in the SAM, the threshold, the goal, I'm sorry, could increase in the adjustment and the threshold increase subsequently. And so you might go from an exceed to a meet because your, again, current number doesn't change. Your current outcome doesn't change. It's only going to be compared to that adjusted threshold and the adjusted level to determine meets and exceeds. And so there could be an exceed to a meet. And unfortunately, there may be instances where someone initially looked like they had met the threshold, but upon application of that SAM, they might actually, because of an increase from negotiated goal to adjusted level, they might actually fail that measure when all things are said and done. So what does that mean? I'm going to stop just for a second. Well, I'm going to show you just one more visualization, and this is more for the board members that have joined us today. I appreciate all of you taking time out of your business and other entity schedules. The Illinois Workforce Innovation Board Continuous Improvement Committee has asked that all of the core partners develop a site kind of specific to board members and higher level individuals in the system, such as the CEOs and maybe even the Title I administrators. So we're creating a website, or Illinois WorkNet is assisting in creating a site called the WIOA Performance and Transparency page, where we can show all of the core partner performance outcomes on a quarterly basis and an annual basis. So you kind of see this is where we're at in the mock-up, where we would have on the bottom left, the dark gray is your goal. The green means it's exceeding. We're being consistent in our kind of depiction and color coding of exceed, meet, and fails. So in this instance, they were exceeding because they were above the top line of the gray bar graph, which was their goal. So they're exceeding, and that's why it shows up as green. We're doing our best, and anyone that wants to help out, if this is not a good kind of accessible representation of this, we're using the kind of texture of these as well to help people that might have some sight impairments to also see these if they so need to, because they have maybe some impairment of color or something like that. But we're going to continue to build this out where it will take information from all of the core programs and partners and put it in here, so those that want to see the entire system at a core level can see what our outcomes look like. For the Title I program, it's just going to be a different look of what you've seen in the previous slides. You know, we'll be able to just transfer the information from that iPads page straight over here and just show it side by side with the other programs. So we're looking forward to getting that finalized in the coming weeks and months. Run it through the board and their continuous improvement committee, make sure it is what they wanted. There's some additional information you can see underneath the title of the performance transparency page that gives them more information that might be basic information for a lot of us in the system, but for those that aren't working directly with the system, that are board members, that are CEOs, that new to the system, might find beneficial in definitions and additional information on how performance is captured. So I don't know, Molly, if you want to just quickly open up the phone line to see if someone maybe they're hesitant to have submitted a question in the chat. We'll take questions on any of the information we presented so far, and then we'll move on to the second half of our presentation.
Awesome. Yeah. So I don't
we
see.
have a couple hands up.
I'm going to look and see. We do have a hand up. Let's see. Lucas, I'm going to ask you to unmute. So you should be able to unmute now. I think you may have just remuted yourself, Lucas.
Okay, maybe he's changed his mind or having difficulty unmuting himself. We'll give him just another second or two here.
Yeah.
But Lucas, we can come back to you, or if you want to drop your question in the chat pod, we'll certainly respond to it. But for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and go on to the second half of today's presentation. I know a lot of what Brian presented, and Andy Blank has been helping him throughout this there at NIU. They did a webinar again back at the WIOA Summit, the virtual summit back in April. So some of you may have already heard a bit of that information, but we have had some questions in the last several weeks and months about what kind of goes into the statistical adjustment model. So it was nice to see some of the descriptions of the factors that go into there in those slides that Brian presented. We also hope that some of those other questions we've been receiving over the last several weeks have been answered in today's webinar, but we will be putting, as part of technical assistance, we are putting together question and answers, or frequently asked questions, I should say, documents that we'll be attaching to new policies. So look forward to those as we are issuing those new policies to provide you all the information and guidance you need, and hopefully clarify any of your questions and concerns. So I'll move on to what we're doing now. So many of you received an email this morning if you're subscribed and receive our routine notifications from us directly, or from Laura Dom in policy directly. If you receive notifications of policies and notices and other information like that through email blast from Illinois WorkNet, you should get that late tonight or early tomorrow morning. So by tomorrow, all of you should have the guidance you need, but we'll still go over it here today so we can answer questions you might have. You know, first and foremost, we as a system have to respond to all of the statutes and laws and guidance that Departments of Labor and Education issue. So the starting point of that regarding performance, beyond just understanding performance and the measures, which we talked about briefly last week, there was a notice, I'm sorry, a TEGL, it's Training and Employment Guidance Letter 11-19 issued last year that set the stage for state and local negotiations. So I mentioned before, the state went through negotiations with Region 5 up in Chicago from the Department of Labor in May, and set our goals. Part of that TEGL also said that there's a phased-in approach, that some of the measures, as you see further down here, won't be available for formal assessment until program 2022. And those two were employment rate fourth quarter after exit and credential attainment rate. At the time of this TEGL, they felt like there wouldn't be enough information and data to successfully populate the SAM and hold states accountable to those measures. And I'm sure I'm going to repeat myself on this, but however, we have to continue to submit information, the data in our annual and quarterly reports on those measures. It's not absolving us of that responsibility or obligation. It's just saying that until we get further information, or until they get further information, they're not going to hold us accountable as far as sanctions if we fail to meet one of the measures. We still got negotiated goals, so it gave us a target that we should be shooting for. There just won't be any sanctions. And through that transition authority is how they did that. The act itself allowed them, and this is still part of, interesting enough, here we are 6-7 years after implementation of WIOA, we're still implementing WIOA, and this transition authority provided Department of Labor the ability to hold off on a couple measures. However, last week, actually in the middle of our presentation of the webinar last Wednesday, we received a training and employment notice, or a 10, numbered 14-21, that provided some further guidance. And within that guidance, it said that after considering all the data that's been submitted by all the states over the last several years, they still feel like they don't have sufficient data to produce a reliable estimate in the statistical adjustment model for one of the three identified measures, and that one is measurable skill gains. So it shifts measurable skill gains, or MSG, from being accessible in program year 2022 and groups it with those other two I mentioned on the last slide. So now we only have two measures that are up for reasonable assessment: the employment rate second quarter and median earnings. beginning with last year's program year that ended June 30th, 2021. And so we as a state are going to kind of be consistent with how we're going to look at all of the local areas and all of their performance outcomes. So we issued, and here's kind of show that just in a little bit bigger picture of which measures apply in PY22, I'm sorry, 2020, and which of the three measures apply in program year 2022. And just as a reminder, the youth program is a little bit different on those employment measures in that they can also include placement in education or training, not only employment. So it's a little bit further guidance on that, those couple of measures. But this morning, you may have received some guidance from Laura. And again, I mentioned if you're subscribed to get routine notifications of those, you might get it late tonight or early tomorrow. But we issued WIOA Notice 21-01, which is what we're calling a pilot project. So it's implementation of the statistical adjustment model. Brian mentioned that we did not have a statistical adjustment model when we did our negotiations, but we still had to do the negotiations. So we did the best we could with a lot of help from Paula and Brian and Andy and Patty, everyone here at OET, to provide you with as much information as we could going into those negotiations. We gave you a lot of guidance, a couple webinars, some technical assistance information, documents to try and help you prepare for the negotiations in the absence of an actual formal statistical adjustment model. Understanding that, we're kind of working backwards in now preparing to apply a statistical adjustment model. So in fairness to all of you, using what we feel we have the same phase-in authority, we issue this notice as an attempt to, hold some accountability, but provide some leeway, some phased-in approaches, as I mentioned, to how we're going to assess performance. So we're grouping the same measures. The first two are applicable in program year 2020, and the following three in program year 2022, consistent with the department's guidance. But this pilot project is really focused on what happens when we apply the SAM and you get your adjusted levels of performance, your adjusted thresholds, and then your comparison indicates that you maybe have failed a measure. We'll continue to monitor the pilot project. The reason for calling it that is we're going to continue to monitor everything we can as far as data that's available, information that's available, working with NIU to continue to populate the SAM. They've done a lot of work in modeling it in prior years. And so once they've got all the 2020 data in there, they're going to be looking at it, making sure it's reasonable as far as its outcomes and adjustment factors and coefficients and all that. So they'll update it if they need to based on what comes of it. But we do have to implement some appropriate assessment procedures, and those will be in, again, a phased-in approach. And we will look at this. We're not trying to implement a policy or guidance that's kind of a gotcha kind of thing where we know we didn't use a SAM before. We know there's some questions, and in fact, DOL has observed some concerns with the modeling, and so they made adjustments. So we're going to do the same thing. We're not here to try and catch any local board or local areas in performance. If it doesn't work, if we see some abnormalities or something, we're prepared to make some changes if we need to. We'll revise this notice as best we can if that occurs, and even the implementation years and corrective action. And we will make sure to inform all of you. But we still have to move forward. And so, again, we have to continue to submit data and information. And we ask that all of you continue to submit data and information that ultimately will populate the outcomes of your performance. And we will be developing a SAM for the next round of negotiations, which will occur sometime mid-2022, late 2022, depending on when we can have our state level negotiations with Department of Labor. We can't hold ours because one of the key factors, one of the 4 factors in conducting negotiations is that we have our negotiated goals that we can share with all of you. So as you enter, you can kind of look at that and you can kind of gauge how you can assist us as a state in meeting our goals. Well, you have to have knowledge of what those goals are. So we're kind of falling behind them, and the sooner they can get negotiations with us, the sooner we can schedule and coordinate negotiations with all of you. And we anticipate come the new year, sometime at the appropriate, probably thinking April or May, we will start the same round of technical assistance we did last year with some webinars and provide you all the guidance you need to prepare for those and then enter into those negotiation sessions. So here's the phased in approach to this. As I mentioned, it's a several years long process. What we're doing here is in the first year, which is already complete, which is kind of behind us. We didn't feel good about getting anybody caught kind of in the hairs of a potential failure. So in program year 2020, all failures will be held harmless. The local boards and local areas are held harmless, meaning there won't be any mandatory sanctions. However, we will continue to provide general technical assistance as we're doing today. We'll continue to provide assistance on all the measures. We've got several sessions already in the works of coordinating and scheduling that we'll be presenting in the next couple of months and into the new year. And so we'll continue to provide those to help you learn more about each measure, learn how it applies to your operations, learn how you can gain better insight on best practices, implement new policies and procedures, and hopefully improve on those for the appropriate time when sanctions actually do kick in. Will also be always available throughout this process. So this kind of works from the left to the right. If it's available in the PY 2020, it's going to be made available in all the subsequent years after that. So these general technical assistance and optional technical assistance are going to be available every year. It just ramps up a little bit in each of the subsequent years, as you'll see. The hold harmless will eventually drop off depending on the measures and the years. The optional technical assistance really is an opportunity for local boards and local areas, Title I administrators to contact us and say, hey, we know we've got some issues, we've got some concerns. It doesn't even mean you failed a measure. You may have met a measure, but you feel like you can do better, or marginally successful and you feel like you want to give yourself a little more leeway, and keeping in one of its key goals is continuous improvement. You maybe identify an opportunity to do better. And so if you request some assistance from us, we are here to help you, and we can do that on an individual LWIA basis. Maybe we can group some LWIAs together and sit down together in conversation. Hopefully at some point in the near future, we can do those in person, but if not, we'll do them virtually. And we will provide you, again, the technical assistance on one or more measures that you feel like you need for one or more of the three programs. Moving on to next year, or the current year that we're already in, kicks in the first mandatory item. So if you fail performance in program year 2021, we will mandate that you go through technical assistance, not just the general technical assistance, but we want to sit down with you at that point. And again, this is all based on the fact we feel like we're going to have the statistical adjustment model ironed out better. We're going to provide you more technical assistance, and we hope that you can all perform better because of that. But you will be required to go through technical assistance. That's the first phase of sanctions that WIOA indicates. We're just doing it in later years than what they mandate. And then we're going to offer assistance and recommend that you develop a performance improvement plan, which is really a roadmap to success. Identify what the concerns might be, what the issues are that might have contributed to your failure in one or more measures. Let's develop some kind of plan, new policies, new procedures, and other strategies that will help you overcome that failure to, or again, this as far as the PIP or performance improvement plan, not mandatory in PY 2021, but you might want to implement it early on so that you can be successful in subsequent years and not get to that mandatory phase. And that gets us to PY 2022, where the corrective action is now not only mandatory technical assistance if you fail, Now you're going to have to implement the performance improvement plan. We're still working through kind of internally what that's going to look like. I imagine we're going to be reaching out to some of you to get some insight on what you think a good performance improvement plan might look like, so that we can develop some templates. We can develop the information requirements within that. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the elements here in a moment. And then on to PY 2023, where if someone has failed the same measure a third year in a row, the potential WIOA outlines is that there might be a reorganization plan that might be required. And we're going to continue to harp on that might at this point in time, because, you know, we don't know enough about that. We hope nobody ever gets to that 3-year consecutive years of failure, but, you know, we've got to look further into that, and again, continue to monitor overall this policy and pilot project. And then in PY 2024, if everything rolls out as planned and the SAM's working great, then everything's on schedule for holding all of the local boards and local areas accountable to their measures, at least these two, employment second quarter after exit and median earnings. Moving on to the second slide here is just the other 3 measures that are on a 2-year later kind of plan. It looks the same exact way, except the years are 2 years off. And you'll see up in this first phase that those are available at all times. You know, hold harmless, obviously, during these first 3 years, program years 20, 21, and 22, for these 3 measures, we're holding you harmless. And we'll continue to monitor to see if the PY 22 phase in from DOL is even going to happen. You know, we anticipate it will, but we've already had 1 measure that changed. But that general technical assistance, optional technical assistance will be available during that 3-year program year period of time. And this is all after the program year occurs. Obviously, you know, we're doing technical assistance at all times, but this would occur after the end of a program year. All of these potential sanctions or corrective actions. And so then PY 23 is consistent with PY 21 in the last 2 measures, and on down the line to where full implementation will occur during PY 2026. So when we get our outcomes, final outcomes, whatever those outcomes are, we'll have full implementation at that point. Again, assuming everything works out well with the statistical adjustment model, and everyone feels good that we can achieve that goal. Again, this is all about, you know, continuous improvement, not trying to catch anyone after the fact because there wasn't enough time to implement the appropriate changes. We want to continue to give you the assistance you need to implement it starting today. And hopefully subsequent years, you're going to be in good shape to have successes you and your boards expect for all of these measures. So what do these 3 look like in a little bit more detail? So technical assistance, going back to those previous 2 slides, there's a general and there's a mandatory technical assistance. General is just overall information about performance, about the performance measures, about how best to attain successful outcomes through webinars, through in-person training sessions when we're able to get back to where we can sit down face to face with all of you, and other documentation, FAQs and other templates and things that can be developed to help you identify and implement new policies and procedures. We'll help you during these technical assistance sessions develop a performance improvement plan if you so wish, until the point in time where it's mandatory, and then we will certainly help you then. We'll even help you with local or regional plan modifications that might be necessary because of your failure of performance or interest in ensuring you don't fail. We'll coordinate these with all of you. We mentioned last week we're going to be reaching out to a lot of you in the local area in the performance arena to help us develop future webinars, help us develop materials that everyone can learn from. If you've got some best practices, we want to hear about them, and we want to share them with everyone across the state. So we appreciate anyone that wants to step forward and assist us in any of these ways, and look forward to working with you to roll out all of this over the next several months, and then on into the future program years. And then again, the general technical assistance could be in the first year, could be just local boards asking for assistance, even if they haven't failed a performance measure. All that same technical assistance will occur if you have to receive mandatory technical assistance because you failed starting in either PY 21 or 23, depending on the measure. And we'll work with boards to come up with the appropriate information for that, depending on what that indicator is that was failed. The performance improvement plan, or PIP, as I mentioned before, is really, again, the roadblock to better performance. We're going to do a lot of analysis with you, sit down and have you look at your reports, your performance reports. What are your policies, processes, procedures? How are you staffing your centers, and what resources do you have available? And look and see if there are any, identifiable areas for improvement that maybe have led to your failure in a performance measure or just underperformance. We'll help you identify some resolutions to improve on these deficiencies through that analysis, help you identify corrective actions, have progress benchmarks so that you can progressively improve and not feel like you have to do it all at once or get to an end of a year and try to catch up. So we'll want to set some benchmarks throughout a year in developing and implementing your PIP. We do ask that we'll be looking at these to help you through that. Again, we haven't looked at a lot of specifics of this. Another reason why it's being held off for second and third year implementation, we need to kind of set a game plan for what this should all look like and what we would expect in a good performance improvement plan that we think will help you lead to improvement in your outcomes. And we encourage you to be monitoring your performance and your performance improvement plan throughout each program year, not again at the end when it's too late to kind of make some of the adjustments and it's too overwhelming and you fail again potentially because you didn't take the time and plan accordingly leading into the end of the year. And then the final one, again, we hope this never comes to occur, that we don't experience anybody having a failure in the same measure for 3 consecutive years. And that's the key there. It's not 3 failures of any measures over 3 years or anything like that. It's the same measure over 3 years, consecutive years. So if that's the case, there may be a reorganization plan. That's kind of something that will come from the state. If we identify that you failed 3 years in a row, we will determine whether a reorganization plan is required and what it looks like, what elements of a reorganization plan might need to occur, including but not limited to a new local board. If we feel like the failures are because there's a lack of oversight at the board level, we might request that an appointment and certification of a new board needs to occur at that local area. There is statements in the act where if there's a failure of the performance in this manner, eligible providers and one-stop partners that maybe have exhibited poor levels of performance that contributed to the local area's failure would have to, you would have to stop using those until they can correct their actions, their policies, procedures, and that would be all part of this reorganization plan. Again, hoping that the prior kind of corrective actions that are less lenient resolve things to where we never get to this point. And, potentially there could be consolidation, redesignation, or dissolving of a local area if it's such egregious failure of performance that seems the most appropriate action that needs to be taken. And then if there's other actions that seem reasonable that are identified, it would be included in that reorganization plan conversation. As with most policies and procedures in WIOA, there's an opportunity to appeal. So if this is reached and the state issues a reorganization plan, then you have as a board and chief elected official, you have an opportunity to appeal that. We can sit down and discuss it and maybe revise it or rescind it altogether if you have some valid points that are heard. So stop there. I'm not seeing any questions. I don't know if everyone is still trying to absorb this WIOA notice that came out this morning. We hope this provides you kind of an insight of what that says. But if you've got any questions or to the notice, or if you've got any questions for Brian and Andy again on the statistical adjustment model, I'm not seeing anything in the chat pod. But Molly, if you just open up the phone lines, maybe someone feels more comfortable asking questions over the telephone.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions, feel free to do the raise hand. I can unmute you or let us know if you want to go ahead and speak up.
The cold weather must have everyone's microphones and fingers frozen. This is unlike all of those that I recognize in the participant or attendees list that we don't have any questions. So maybe we did too good a job of explaining it and left you without any further comments or questions. Or again, like I said, since it just went out today, maybe you need a little bit more time to absorb it, read it a couple times and review this information and ensure you totally understand it before you maybe have some of those questions, but feel free to unmute yourself. We have somebody wanting to speak. Molly, can you kind of address that? They're saying they can't find where they can unmute
Q&A.
themselves.
Okay, perfect. I will, yes. One moment and I can fix that. Let's see. Okay, Dana. I just
Hey,
asked.
Dana. Nope, it's still showing she's muted.
I did permit talking. Oh, Dana, it looks like you can talk. Can you
Okay.
talk?
Now we got it.
I wasn't
Hey,
asking
Dana.
a question, but nobody could unmute themselves, so I was just letting you all know.
Okay, well, you know, we'll be working with you and the IWP Performance Task Force as well with some of these steps and measures that were discussed today, developing technical assistance, identifying appropriate elements of performance improvement plan. But again, you know, Paul and I, when we meet with you, we'll probably be asking volunteers to help us develop these future sessions and documents. So please all, I recognize several of you that are on that task force. Let us know if you feel comfortable in helping us, or if we know already that you've got some best practices we'd like to highlight, we may be reaching out to you directly. All right, with no questions having come in at this point, we'll go to the last couple slides. Appreciate your following along with this. There's a lot of resources out there that we want to make you aware of. These are all kind of federal documents, the act, these are all links. So once you get the actual PowerPoint PDF, you'll be able to hopefully connect with these. Many of you are probably already knowledgeable of these if you're in the performance area of the workforce system. But, you know, we have the act, the final regulations, a lot of TEGLs, the 10 that just came out, and there may be other ones out there that you might feel that are suitable for review and understanding of performance in general and in more detail. Those are the requirements in the TEGLs Acts and all that. There's further assistance that's available through workforcegps.org, the WIOA website, the Department of Labor website on performance indicators and measures provides a lot of guidance as well. The performance accountability guidance, that's a page or pages specific to performance on that Workforce GPS site. And they're the ones that do the afternoon WIOA Wednesday webinars. We apologize for sometimes competing with theirs, but this just seemed to be the most logical and best time and day to present our webinars and not take up the morning sessions that other partners and other areas of Title I and the system would like to use for providing you information and technical assistance, professional development. So we're holding these in the afternoon, so we aren't competing with them. I mentioned the notice, it's attached to the WIOA policy in e-policy of Illinois WorkNet, so you can find the links to that. Ultimately, this notice will be attached to the specific area around sanctions and incentives, not to the general performance accountability, but until we update that policy on the assessments and all that, we're going to keep it at a higher level attachment. So if you didn't get the email from Laura today, or her link wasn't working or something, here's a link here as well that'll direct you to that e-policy page. And then finally, we've talked about, the different areas and elements of our technical assistance that we plan on doing moving forward, starting with last week's Performance 101 session. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about measurable skill gains, specifically how you can better understand the measure, accurately report it, and kind of dig deep into that measure, because we get a lot of questions from all of you. And we hope to set you in a place where you feel more comfortable understanding the act, understanding the guidance is available, and making decisions, rather than feel like you always have to come to us. We appreciate you coming to us so that you can get the right answers. Many times I think you have the answers, you're just kind of getting confirmation from us. So we hope we can help you, do a better day-to-day job of assessing and tracking these. And so we'll follow that up 2 weeks later with the same kind of similar conversation around the credential attainment and understanding that measure. And then December 8th, we hope to do, it's probably going to be virtual because I don't see us changing as far as ability to get together. More of a roundtable where we'll sit down with all of you, probably a lot of you from the IWP task force, performance task force, and just really talk through some scenarios, some of the issues that you've sent to us, so that others can hear what those are. Again, hear how we walk through a decision on whether it's allowable, whether it's something that goes into the measure, whether it's something that meets one of the exclusion reasons, et cetera. And then we'll finalize this year's set of performance technical assistance on December 15th, where we'll talk about those other 3 measures. They don't seem to have as much concern and questions coming our way. So we think we can probably do a pretty good job of addressing all 3 of those together in one session. And then you'll see below what we want to plan for program year, or calendar year, 2022. If you're not subscribed to receive notifications of webinars, not only these on performance, but those that occur in the morning WIOA Wednesday webinar, here's a link that'll get you to a place where you can subscribe and get those things in your email on a regular basis, so you can keep up to date and add these to your calendars and be prepared to attend. Again, I don't see any other questions, so we're going to end up a little bit early today based on that. Send all of your questions around performance to Paul and myself. Please, even if it's statistical adjustment model that you have questions about, send those to Paul and I. Some of them we can probably answer in working with Brian and Andy over the past year or so. If we can't, we will certainly reach out to them to get the response, the appropriate response. But we need to see those, we need to receive those and share those as appropriate, as opposed to them going directly to Brian and Andy. So just use our emails here. If you want to call me directly, you can do that with my my business cell phone there. But look forward to working with all of you. Hopefully today's session help you understand how the SAM is going to get applied, what it means to your performance outcomes, and especially some understanding of that new WIOA notice on how the implementation of the phased-in pilot project is going to occur. This session has been recorded. I'll go ahead and finish up for you, Molly. This session's been recorded, so the link that Molly provided in the chat pod, you'll be able to find the PowerPoint and the recording once it's created and uploaded to their site. Sometimes that takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days, so be patient in looking for that. Hopefully last week's session, if it's not already up there, will be uploaded in the next few days. So if you missed the Performance 101 session, you can observe that and share share the schedule of webinars that occurred and will be occurring with all of your staff and others in your system that you think could benefit from these, so they can kind of put a hold on their calendar for now, and then be looking for the actual official announcements and emails from ICSPS to add them to their calendar and register to attend. Thank you for all of your attention today. Please complete the Survey Monkey that Molly has put in the chat. You'll also get an email with a link to that, if not today, tomorrow. So we do ask that you complete those so we can learn what worked today, what we can do better, and improve on all future sessions. So look forward to hearing from all of you and working with you in the future around performance. Thanks, Brian and Andy. Paula, my sidekick, invaluable help that she provides with everything we do. Patty Schnorr with our performance unit as well, overseeing everything we're doing. And then Molly, you, Kirsten, Amy, all of your team at ISU for assisting us in our webinar today. Have a great day. Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks.